It's the first Sunday of Lent. Lent 2020, a year ago, Lent 1, was the last Sunday that we all worshiped together in the buildings of College Park. Lent is the 40 days before Easter, not counting Sundays. There are 6 Sundays in the Lenten series, each of which is considered a little Easter. Lent, a word that means springtime, is a time for getting our bounce back, testing to see how resilient our faith and our lives are becoming. As I've said many times, Lent is spring cleaning for the soul, a moment to clean up our mental and spiritual hygiene. It's athletic training for our spirits, renewing our best spiritual practices that help us reconnect to God, the power outside of us, to our fellow humans, to other animals, and to the rest of this remarkable creation. It's not a shame or guilt or renunciation per se, but it's about life abundant. It's also about hearing the cries of the hurting and about recommitting ourselves to doing the difficult work that God's wild spirit has called us to. Our theme for this year is Alleilone. You should say that with me. Alleilone. Alleilone means one another. 2 words in English, but it's 1 word in Greek, alleilone. It's used 100 times in 94 New Testament verses. 47 of those verses give instructions to the church, and 60% of those instructions come from Paul. When you look at these verses, a few common themes show up. 1/3 of the one another commands deal with the unity of the church. This is going to be a challenge to talk about these since the Christian church in North America is anything but unified. 1/3 of them instruct Christians to love one another. This we can always use more practice with. About 15% stress an attitude of humility and deference among believers. Humility doesn't come naturally for most of us, especially in America. And then there are another dozen random passages from which this morning's text comes. We'll be looking at these texts on Sundays and Wednesdays during Lent, asking, how can we better one another each other? So, random question. What's the most mysterious book of the New Testament in your humble opinion? Most would probably say Revelation, but that is a good but lazy answer. Others might offer Colossians, which purports to be from Paul to his friends in Colossae, but the letter is so cosmic and out there that it might have been written under the influence of a foreign substance. It is a wonderful letter, just filled with remarkable phrases and verses, so it actually might be the most mysterious book in the New Testament. You should read Colossians if you haven't read it lately. But my vote for the most mysterious New Testament book would go to the book of Hebrews. No one knows who wrote the New Testament book we call Hebrews. There are some hints that it might have been written by a woman, and if so, it would be the only one in our New Testament authored by a female. Who knows when it was written? Perhaps after the destruction of the temple in 70 CE. The writer is using the temple as a metaphor for Jesus, but it's clear that she has never visited the actual temple. She only knows it from its description in the Hebrew Bible, not the actual physical temple that existed there in Jerusalem. Hebrews begins as a sermon, a riff on some of the Psalms. Then the middle is a theology lesson. Then it ends like a letter. The book has the best Greek usage of the entire New Testament, on a par with Luke and Acts. The Greek is precise, elegant, and sophisticated. The addressees seem to be on some kind of a journey, maybe to the temple itself. And the theology is wild. The writer wants us to see that Jesus Christ is everything that we need, so she portrays Jesus in a confusing kaleidoscope of Jewish images. Jesus is the high priest offering the sacrifice. He is the altar itself, and Jesus is the sacrifice on the altar. Jesus is the one to whom the offering is being made and the one receiving it as well. And finally, Jesus is God's holy temple too. I mean, wait, what? Reading this dizzying Christology makes one want to shout, "Block that metaphor!" There is too many in fast succession, all of them equaling Jesus. I think I somewhat understand her point, but it's almost overkill. So the book of Hebrews is the WandaVision of the New Testament. Compelling, but impossible to understand fully. In verse 10, she has just laid out her complex Russian puzzle doll theology when she exhorts her readers, "Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for the one who has promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." Such a lovely, simple, and unique phrase. Let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds. There's not another verse just like it in our Bible. Granted, hearing the verb stimulate calls to mind many other things, and for once I'm glad that Roland isn't in Greensboro to elaborate. But what it reminds me most of is Joe Bob Briggs, the world's only drive-in movie critic, an alter ego to John Bloom. Anne and I read Joe Bob's humorous movie reviews each week faithfully when we were in Texas. And he would often talk about his girlfriend, Wanda Bodine. Wanda loved jewelry, and Joe Bob scoured the Lone Star State to look for stimulated diamonds for Wanda. We left Texas before Joe Bob found such a necklace. Myself, I've never seen a stimulated diamond, but I did promise Anne that if I ever found one, I'd get it for her. And if you Google stimulated diamonds, you'll get a number of hits from spelling-challenged jewelers, too. In the verse in Hebrews 10:24, the Greek word used in that phrase, stimulate one another to love and good deeds, is paroxymos, which is here used to mean to spur, to provoke, to amp up, to energize, to abet, to fire up, to arouse. All of these are fantastic ways of translating this word, and it has a bit of aggressive connotation. Be aggressive. Be aggressive. Let's push ourselves. Let's impel one another to love and good works. Let's foment agape love and divine deeds. Love and good works is a wonderful way to summarize the Christian church's entire reason for existing in the world. This is literally our raison d'etre. I'm a Jesus follower, so I can find many excellent reasons to be at a good church. But perhaps the best is this: I will act on so many, many more good works because I'm with a group of fellow Christians who are electrifying one another to love actively, continually thinking of new ways to love and creating endless opportunities to do good here and now. Alone, I would not do a tenth of what you all impel me to do. We energize each other for agape and good deeds, and we do so very much more because we are all together providing opportunities, ideas, and information about how best to love this city. Just off the top of my head, consider all the good works and the love that people at College Park were doing just this past week. Jerry and Terry were collecting contributions for Greensboro Urban Ministry on Mardi Gras. Terry and Gray were at Special Blend Coffee Shop so that special adults could have a delightful job. Blair was tutoring needy students. Beverly fed people literally on the street. A group led by PJ and Eileen were getting ready to cook dinner tonight for 100+ people who are not yet sheltered. Deb, Wendy, Allison, and Jesse, and many others were finding forever homes for rescued dogs. Jerry and Adam were working at our building to get our phones working again. James and Allison spent the week planning for national youth camps to help let young people know that they were loved by God and people. Lynn and her cohort led an impressive youth group in discussions and fun. Carrie, Nancy, and Lisa taught kids about the wonders of books and libraries. Lauren, Ann, Mike, Susan, Chris, Edna, Gary, Melissa, Mike, and Carmen, and too many others to name, tried to teach kids from kindergarten to graduate school via Zoom and in person. Kathy and Cheryl counseled people who were hurting, while Zach, Nate, Michelle, and Grace did the social work. Lisa is singing with our children. Jerry, Randy, and John are volunteering with Out of the Garden. I could go on, and you could too. I say this not to pat ourselves on the back, but to say this is exactly how we stimulate one another to radical love and creative good works. So keep up the good work. Obituaries for Rush Limbaugh this past week brought me back to the 80s and the career decision that led me to College Park. Growing up in San Diego and then in Waco at Baylor and Louisville for seminary, I spent years surrounded by evangelical Christians and their fiery leaders, not all of whom turned out to be very Christ-like. Up close, I realized that many are actually driven by an apocalyptic worldview, that Jesus would be coming back soon. Evangelicals always depicted themselves as the righteous remnant that stood against the forces of secular humanism, which threatened Christian orthodoxy and introduced a dangerous moral relativism. They thought exemplified by feminism and the so-called gay agenda and the like. This sharp juxtaposition between true believers and the world allowed their preachers to vent their spleen and making preaching that much more entertaining to watch. But I realized early on that they actually lived out of their anger more than people realized. Anger in the voice of indignation drove a sense of grievance that their, quote, traditional family values were being displaced by liberal humanists. It was us against them in the spiritual battle that would continue until God intervened directly in history and vindicated the true believers. At that time, that sense of grievance had a secular voice as well in the newfound genre of outrage radio led by Rush Limbaugh. For 3 hours a day, he vented about the headlines and encouraged his listeners to join him in moral outrage. I was only 26 when I graduated from Southern in Louisville, but I decided that I wasn't going to live out of my anger. Spiritually, I knew that it was deadly. I remember thinking about Rush Limbaugh as well as Mark Levine. How can they wake up every day so ready to tap into their rage as a source of their spiritual energy and focus? I won't recount for you all the terrible, bigoted, and racist things he often said. But I wasn't entirely surprised that they were as popular as they became. Just take the back roads from Murphy to Manio, and you pass town after town that time has passed by. There was a lot of frustration and disappointment across the middle of our state and the heartland of our country, and hate radio has tapped into that artery. Washington Post noted that Rush was married 4 times, a reminder that leading with your anger doesn't work so well at home. And I decided that I didn't want to raise my family that way either. So we decamped for Greensboro and College Park, where I've been able to work out of the positive spirituality that is actually exemplified in the actual Jesus of history. And I've been free to blend the insights of science with the anecdotal wisdom of our spiritual tradition, rather than have a faith that is threatened by education. I'm so grateful to have spent our time together, developing a vision and dreaming of what is possible when we release the divine creativity that is within us. We have stimulated one another to love and good works, and we can continue to do so. We have been more devoted to synchronicity rather than conflict, harmony rather than aggression, with Christ as our guide and Lord. You can gain notoriety in a perpetual state of rage. Media, pundits love to cover a fight. It sells. But it's not a profound way to live. And ultimately, we are looking for truth in our religion and faith. We're hoping to discover a deeper, fuller way of being in the world in the short time we have left on this planet. It's better than diamonds, real or stimulated. Amen.